I just felt that eruption from inside, just heat and then sweat everywhere. And then I could hear my heartbeat in my ear.
Tamsen Fadal is an Emmy Award-winning journalist, menopause advocate, and author of How to Menopause.
And it is going to affect things differently. What happens when it comes to sex? What happens in the workplace?
She's also the producer of The M Factor, Shredding the Silence on Menopause, a groundbreaking documentary about women's health.
I think we need to have a baseline for all doctors, not just OBGYNs.
Join us as we dive into her journey and the inspiration behind her book.
It seems that we hit our stride in our mid-late 40s, and then peri or menopause takes us down like a notch or 20. Sometimes out of nowhere. It seems like it can happen sort of overnight. I think that something like that happened to you. Tell us a little bit about your menopause story.
Yeah, it literally took me down to the bathroom floor. I anchored the evening news in New York City for a long time, and I'd been having problems, but I didn't equate them to perimenopause because I didn't know the word or menopause. And I was having problems with recalling words and look at a word in a teleprompter that I was reading and skip it because I knew it, but I couldn't say it. And this one particular night was November of 2019. And I remember it because I remember, where we were right before we went into to COVID in 2020. And I was anchoring the news and we were in a commercial break. And I just felt, and if anyone's experienced it, that eruption from inside of just heat and then sweat everywhere. And then I could hear my heartbeat in my ear. What's happening? And I said out loud, because I worked in a studio full of men, if I fall over, someone catch me, kind of half joking, half like, oh gosh, what's happening? And one of the co-anchors, the sports guy, I said, I think you should get off the set. And I went he led me to the ladies' room, and I just went down to the floor and was like, I have to do anything to cool myself off and stop my heart from racing. And then I got up about 20 minutes later and went home, and the next week I was like, I got to figure out what was that? Like, I'm not an anxious person. So I ended up going to my therapist, who put me on Lexapro and said, it's anxiety, you're stressed. Right. I went to another doctor, and they said, let's just see what's going on. We'll test it out. And then I finally did blood work and got a note in my patient portal not too long after that that said, in menopause, any questions? With little, a doctor.
Like,
and
yes,
I was like,
many.
You're asking her, questions. How did this happen? So that's where that started. And it took me down. It did. But what I didn't realize is that all the things that I was playing whack-a-mole with, these other symptoms, were all leading up to, where I was. And I just had no idea what was going on.
Yeah. And I think you are so not alone there. You've been one of the most important voices in menopause advocacy. We thank you.
Thank you.
Was there a moment when you realized that you needed to write this book?
Yeah. I kept, because I guess when I was asked any questions, I'm like, I have lots of questions. And so I went out, talking, asking questions.
You're
a lot
a journalist.
Of questions. A journalist. That's what I knew to do to solve. But what I kept running up against was like, no one really had a solution. Like, there was no one pill. There was no one answer. And so I started doing work and asking the questions, working on a documentary about it. But the book was really came to life because I said, there's so many parts of it. It's not just what happens in the doctor's office. Like, it's not just, here's your patch, here's your progesterone, maybe testosterone, and be on your way. It affects all these different aspects of your life, the bedroom, the boardroom, what happens wherever you are, your mindset, this time in life. So I said, there's just too much, and there's too many rich experts out there that I really would love to pull it together in a book.
In your book, I love this. You say you don't pass through menopause as most people have been led to believe. You enter it and live there for the rest of your life. Yeah. Tell us what you mean. I know what you mean.
I think what's interesting about it, and now I look at it as a gift. I don't think I did for a long while. But, when you come into menopause is really just that one day, 24 hours that, at the day after you haven't had your period for 12 months. So that's what it is. And then everything after is considered postmenopausal, but really you come into this time in your life. And I think that that's the important part. And that's the part that I want the women that are in their 20s or their 30s to realize. So if they're coming into this time, it's not something to dread. It's another transition, and it's a very normal and the only transition you're going to want to do, because if you live long enough, you're going to luckily be able to come into this stage. And so I feel like you sit in this part now, once you go through menopause, and it is going to affect things differently, whether it is your mindset, the community around you, who you want to be around, your relationships, what happens when it comes to sex, what happens in the workplace, that things might change. So I think I look at this time now and I'm really grateful for it.
Right,
So it feels good.
exactly. You're in the club. Some people are describing your book, How to Menopause, as the talk women never had, which I think is a perfect way to put it. What are some of the biggest misconceptions you had about menopause before you started your research?
Well, I think the biggest was when it happens. I was like, this can't be now. I'm not a menopausal woman. I think it's first of all how every woman goes by it so differently. I
Mhm.
had no idea. I mean, it really is so individual. Anyone, I don't know that any two women are going to come by it the same way. Also, the myths around hormone therapy, I had no idea. Being very fearful of breast cancer my whole life, I didn't understand the study. There was a study 20 years ago that really confused a lot of women, had women throw out their hormones. They were moving along just fine, knowing that that was something that they were doing once they got into menopause. And so I think I didn't understand that. I didn't understand that I would be a candidate for it. How many women are candidates for that versus not? And then I think the third big myth was that I didn't think that sex or any of those other things were going to be anything to look forward to. And I
Mm.
realized now that these can be some of the best years, and you can feel even better than before. And I didn't believe that
Mm.
until I started
Mhm.
living it.
Nearly a third of women ages 18 to 65 feel dismissed by their
Mm,
doctors, you write in your book, for seeking what they think is hormone related symptoms. I still don't understand why it's the knee jerk response for
mhm.
so many well meaning practitioners to not listen.
I know. I've thought about that often. And it's such a good question because I think that's really where we need to go next with
Yeah.
all of this. I really do. Because when you walk into somebody you've trusted for such a long time, and most of the time we've been with our OBGYNs or any doctor,
Yeah.
for a number of years, you find a doctor you like, you stick to them. Like I don't
Yep.
switch them, I don't switch around all the time. And you feel like they haven't heard you. I think one of the big problems is that it's very hard to describe what's going on, right?
Mhm.
The I don't feel like myself syndrome. Like I just don't feel like myself. I don't really know what it is. If a doctor hears that now, because I think we've educated so many, or hopefully are educating so many, if you hear a woman say that and a woman is in her late 30s or 40s, you can pretty much say like, okay, you should probably go into this bucket here, and we should start looking at the next list of questions, which are you dealing with any of these symptoms? I think that part of
Mhm.
it is just the fear wrapped around that study from 20 years ago. I think it's a
It's
lack of
still a
information.
holdover.
It's a holdover. It's just got such a grip, and it makes me so sad because as somebody who's been in the media a long time, I think what a disservice to women, right? Just what
Mhm.
a disservice on so
Mhm.
many levels. But I also think that it's dismissed because a lot of times women are dismissed, quite frankly, when we go in and complain about something and it sounds like we're just complaining about it.
Yeah, and we hear time and again from, from OBGYNs who
Yeah.
are converts now who
Yes.
said, I will be honest and say that I got 1 hour's worth of,
Yes.
training on menopausal women.
And they all say the same thing.
Yeah.
It's the same amount of time.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter where the school was.
Yeah.
They didn't. So anybody that is out there talking about it now, I just kudos to them because they have learned on their own.
To that point, what are some important questions that women should be asking, demanding
Yeah.
of doctors?
It's so good. I was talking to a few doctors that said they're getting phone calls now like this. Are you comfortable talking about hormones? Do you know anything about menopause? So women are listening. How cool is that to hear? So, I think that you do.
It's
I mean,
what I tell them to say.
oh, I know they're listening to you. I'm telling you, two doctors told
Yeah.
me that last night. I said, wait,
hilarious.
what? And they said, yes, the front desk knows how to answer those questions now because they're getting the questions that are
Yeah.
incoming.
Good.
One of the doctors was in Miami and one was in Los Angeles. So people are listening. Those
That's
women are listening to
amazing.
you there.
Truly.
It's
Yeah.
so important though. But I mean, those are the questions to ask. Like, are you comfortable talking about menopause? Can you talk to me about my options? Are you willing to prescribe hormones to me if that's something that I want to do? And if I can't do them or I don't want to do them, can you share other options with me?
Yeah.
I mean, those are the questions. And then,
Right.
and then you can go down from there. But I think that those are the four big ones to at least feel like, okay, this is a doctor I'm going to go to, spend my time going to, my money going to get some help.
And are there sort of red flags when you hear certain things from
Oh.
doctors? Because I know what I think they are, but
I know what we've heard. Most women get through this. Like, see how you do. If your symptoms are not so bad, you're gonna be okay. Most women have gotten through this. which is that dismissive,
Mhm.
awful, or
And from male and female.
for male and female.
Yeah.
There's no, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely not a distinction there. And and I think the other big thing is like, there's a risk. There's a risk if you're going to do hormones. You know about that, right? And I think that just set any woman that hears, and we talked about Dr. Avram Blooming, but any woman that hears breast cancer is like, oh, a risk of anything is put back on their heels and doesn't want to have anything to do with it. Dr. Blooming was doing a discussion and asked people like, are you scared of heart disease? Are you scared of this? You're scared of that? And then he said he is scared of breast cancer, and every hand in the room went up. And so, and I understand, I'm one of them, so I understand that. But when a doctor says that, a doctor you trust, that is dismissing anything that you want to ask after that.
So many women struggle with talking to their partners about
Yeah.
menopause and symptoms. And talk to us a little bit about that. And what is your advice for having open, honest conversations?
Yeah, I'm hopeful that those conversations are going to get easier as more and more women are talking about it, so more and more men are hearing it. But it's not an easy one. If you're dating somebody, or even if you're married to somebody for a long time, it's not easy to say, sex is no longer pleasurable. It's painful, or this is not you. I wrote a section of the book called "Is it your husband or your hormones?" Because I do think that oftentimes when men don't have some of that information, they assume whatever they assume. This person's not interested in me anymore. Sex is all over. I think it has to just be a conversation outside the bedroom, quite frankly, in that here's what I'm going through, the who, what, where, when of understanding it. They don't need big details. They just need to understand, though, every woman's going to go through this. This is where I am going through it. And this is why I'm not either acting, like I was acting before, or not enjoying sex, or have rage, or, just not feeling good.
I also, if we agree that any peri or menopausal symptoms, hot flashes, dryness, mood shift, reflects a fluctuation or loss of estrogen, why are we not prescribing HRT earlier?
I know.
Preemptively.
I know. I mean, we're just fighting it all the way up, and I'm hopeful that more doctors are willing to do that in perimenopause and see a woman come in and not saying it's got to go 12 months without a period, because that doesn't make any sense. And I think it's going to come down to education in schools. I think it's going to come down to education and women demanding that.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to come with regard to research and education of what happens later in life for those next 30, 40, however many years, if you don't have that.
And is that shifting on the educational front?
I'm hopeful of that. I mean, we're hearing more schools talk about it. We released a documentary. We had room theaters of doctors coming in there just to start the conversation with them, which I was really encouraged by, because I thought doctors will know most of the stuff, right? But doctors came together to have the discussion afterwards. And, the film was just a fraction. It was an hour long. We couldn't even begin to cover everything we needed to cover. And there's so many different opinions out there. But at least it started a conversation in that direction so that doctors can feel like they're talking to each other about that. So I'm hopeful there's a shift. But I think the shift has to be with schools. I think the shift, quite frankly, should be in health classes when women are very, when girls are learning this, so they know what happens, instead of we've got this timeline and after reproductive years, we're just not there anymore.
You write, menopause has to fight the double battle of sexism and ageism. I know we've sort of talked about this, but what would the standard of care be if men went through menopause?
I know. I mean, I think it's certainly not that. I mean, what's the standard of care if they have no libido? It's 10 times greater than ours. I think the standard of care would be they've been studied, they've been researched, this is the solution to it, and move on. If men are suffering from testosterone, they're put on it. There's an FDA approved testosterone for them.
Right.
We're still fighting to make that happen and not have to use a tenth of a compounded version of this and beg somebody to give it to us and hope that it comes in the right, and it's not too messy. Yeah. So, I think that they would have a very different standard of care. And I think that they certainly wouldn't have to, come together and advocate for it. That's what I don't think. But I'm proud that we're doing it. It's unfortunate we have to, but there's no choice, because we don't want that next generation to be having to do the same thing.
Right.
And I think we're stopping it here. I really do believe that.
Yeah, I agree. I love how you call these sort of midlife years the Bolden years.
Thank you.
Talk to me about how you see this stage of life and the reframe.
I do see a reframe, and I don't know that I did before I was in it, but I do feel, I always hear the golden years, and I'm like, I don't know. I
Yeah.
feel bolder. Like
It's a
I feel
little too on Golden
bolder.
Pond.
It's too. It is. It is.
Golden Girls.
Golden girls, golden everything. And I was like, you know what? I mean, they're great and they're beautiful and they're bright, but I do feel bolder. I do feel very different than I did before. I do feel like I think of myself oftentimes if I'm sitting somewhere and even having this conversation. If we were having it 5 years ago, I'd be nervous that I got every answer perfectly correct and didn't, I have just given myself some freedom, like to just be who I am.
It's good. It's good coinage. You have definitely sparked a movement between the book and the documentary, The M Factor. What do you think still needs to change in the way that menopause is discussed and treated?
Yeah. I mean, I think what has to change is thinking of it still as a midlife thing. I think we've got to get back, we've got to roll that clock back a little bit. I think that's important. I think we need to have a baseline for all doctors, not just OBGYNs. I think that baseline needs to be if you're going into your GP, if you're going into any doctor, so they kind of know to look for those symptoms. I don't think this is just a over there thing. And then I'd really like to see the education move on it. We're seeing a lot of telehealth companies, which is encouraging. They're really helping get women in the door right now, so they're not suffering. But I do think the education has to be there with the research too.
Thank you so
thank you.
much. You are
Thank you.
such an inspiration, and thank you for moving this forward. We are just delighted to have you here, and
Thank you.
Congrats on your book.
Thank you so much.
It's so good.